What's up, guys? Doug Polk here, and today we're going to be having a CardPlayer exclusive strategy video on 4-betting. Now, I want to talk about 4-betting because I feel like it's a subject a lot of players mess up, they don't fully understand, and I think intuitively most players know that they need to mix in some 4-bet bluffs when they're facing 3-bets, but they're not exactly sure how to do it or really how to do it correctly. The first step when you're trying to figure out your 4-bet range is to figure out what hands you want to get in preflop for value. Now, that's really important to your total strategy because otherwise you don't know how much you're going to want to be 4-betting. In spots where you only want to get in aces and kings, you can't really have that many 4-bet bluffs because you only have 2 value bets. But as you move into mid and late position, you start to add in queens and jacks and ace king, and that makes it so you actually can 4-bet bluff more. The more value bets that you have, the more you're also able to mix in bluffs. Now, I will say that in general, I would say in a full ring game, I think aces and kings from early position is about all you want to get in. In mid position or under the gun to mid and 6-max, ace, king, queens plus is probably the only hands you want to get in. And then generally from cutoff to big blind, jacks plus and maybe even 10s plus versus some players, and ace king are all totally fine to be getting in, particularly by 4-bet calling. You can always 5-bet jam a bit looser than 4-bet call because you have fold equity, whereas if you 4-bet for value and they jam, you should always be calling. So moving on, let's talk about how do we pick out the bluffs. Now, first off, we start with those value bets. We know the hands we're gonna 4-bet for value, and then we decide, okay, the size of the 3-bet is whatever amount, right? What hands can I profitably call? And it might help you to actually pull up some kind of range software to input what hands you're going to call. Will I call Jack 10 suited? Will I call 10-9 suited? And kind of draw a line around all the hands that you know you can profitably call. Now that you've built out your call range, you don't want to be 4-bet bluffing with those hands because you're taking a hand that can make a positive expected value call, and turning it into a 4-bet, which might even be losing because if you get jammed on, then you have to fold your equity. Don't 4-bet hands that are profitable enough to call, planning on folding to jam. In general, maybe there's some hands that are close, could go either way, but that's a good general rule to go by. So now that you've figured out all your calls, it's time to figure out what hands we want to 4-bet bluff with. Now, the first type of bluff, and this is the one that is most clear and most well known, is you want to be bluffing with hands that have an ace in them. Because when you have an ace, your opponent is much less likely to have a hand like aces, ace king, ace queen, so they're more likely to be bluffing. Now, while I would recommend mainly trying to pick suited aces or ace X off suits that can't quite call, while I'd recommend those being the strongest hands to 4-bet bluff in general, you do want to keep in mind that if you always use those hands, certain boards become kind of obvious. And this is something that I see a lot in tournaments or even cash games to some extent. When somebody 4-bets and there's a call and the flop comes ace high, the player that called the 4-bet should know that the 4-betting player has a lot of top pair now. So those boards are going to be especially strong for the player that 4-bet, and not a very good situation for the player that flatted pre. Now the thing is, the way that you take advantage of that is you don't always use those ace X's. You mix in some suited connectors that can't call. Let's say you decided that 10-9 suited is the loosest you can call with a suited connector. Well, then 9-8 suited should definitely make its way into your 4-bet bluff range. That way you can represent having an ace on ace high boards. You can have some playability with some straight draws and flush draws. You can kind of protect the fact that you don't always just have those high pairs or ace king, and it'll play nicely for you in different spots. Additionally, you might want to look to work in some other offsuit Broadway hands like king queen off or king jack off, depending on where they 3-bet and if you think you can flat or not, because those hands have good removal against value bets. They're less likely to have ace king, ace queen, ace jack, kings, queens, jacks. All those hands are less likely when you hold hands like that. However, I will say this about those hands like king, queen, king, jack, and like 9-8 suited. While those are nice to mix into your play, it still is better to use the hands with an ace in them because you're more likely to just get a fold. In fact, as you 4-bet bigger, it's better to have an ace in your hand because they're less likely to have strong hands. And as you 4-bet to a smaller size, it's, I think, a little bit better to have those hands with a little more deception. Now, overall, I would say that when you're 4-betting, you should look to probably make it about 2.5x the size of your opponent. Start with your value bets, work in your calls, and then pick those bluffs that we mentioned in this video. And if you want to learn more about 4-betting and how to deal with 4-betting, check out the Upswing Poker Lab. We have a lot on the pre-flop parts of poker play to help you develop in those spots.